Hello and welcome to the smartest Moron, where, finally doing this after so many years. I made a top 10 list regarding an HD remaster and additions that could be added to Xenosaga, without fully grasping what could be done with a remaster. Despite a surprisingly positive reception, some people were right in pointing out me just not knowing what the hell I was doing. And let's face it, I was, and still am, a small channel, and I wanted to try and cover stuff to get the most views. One of the major fears about covering this game though was its themes and story centering around religion, all the symbolism, etc. that would no doubt go over my head. Then I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. I review and like games my own way. There's a reason I'm not looking back at Mega Man X Command Mission or Shadow Hearts from the New World despite their good gameplay after all. I have a preference, and I'm sticking with that despite any complaints others may have. So it's up to Xenosaga to interest me beyond themes like that. And fortunately, it does, especially considering I still support the idea of an HD remaster, even if the publisher does not. So how did I get into Xenosaga? Well, oddly enough, through Super Robot Wars, mainly the DS version. The continuity of this series is weird, as it canonically links to the original generation, and is set in another world, and even crosses over with characters from Namco x Capcom. This effectively made Xenosaga one of the few series to be part of this universe, even referencing stuff in the Project Cross Zone games. Granted, you can think of it like an alternate universe of Xenosaga, considering how she got here makes absolutely no sense. By the time I saw kos-mos in action along with her rival t-elos, I was convinced to try the series. I would eventually sell those games to get a 3DS, but I eventually rebought them from a booth run by Limited Run Games, which had all three in pretty good condition. And I may have been ripped off considering Game 2 cost more than Game 1. We'll get into that next time with Xenosaga 2. Oh god, I have to actually beat that game. Okay, so let's just dive into the review before my sanity starts to slip. It might be already too late for that.
Disabling auto safety. Destroy all targets.
Going to say this right now, if you don't like story-heavy games, you may not like this series. The pacing of the story is very slow, with very long cutscenes that, if not broken up by gameplay, will be as long as the ones in the Metal Gear Solid series. Does that mean the combat is bad? Not really. It's a turn-based RPG without any random encounters and requiring combos strung together with square and triangle buttons. With the exception of some characters, square are your physical strikes, while triangle are ether attacks, and some even possess elemental properties. On each turn you gain 4 AP, the meter beneath your health and EP. Each attack is worth about 2 points, so you can hit twice. By canceling one attack or just guarding, you will fill up the AP bar to full on the next turn, allowing for a special attack to be used if you wish to do so. And it will depend on what tech attack is set, and as you level up, you will gain more various types of these attacks, and can even customize them for damage output, cooldown times, or even lessening the AP cost used for at least 2 attacks. And the last one in particular is very necessary, especially when enemies start having tons of HP. Just pay attention to your character and what they need the most. For example, I found Xion to be far more proficient with ether attacks despite her physical strikes. Items will use 1 AP, though if you saved up 6, you can use healing items for everybody, so long as you have enough items anyway. Ether is basically magic and has some of the spells you might be used to in other RPGs, along with some unique ones that can be very useful in the situation. Some characters like kos-mos and Ziggy will also have access to a unique weapon they can use when their AP is at max, sometimes using EP too. Unfortunately, their usage diminishes very quickly, and you're better off using tech attacks most of the time. Also, those giant robots I mentioned, you can have your own. Although technically they ain't the biggest ones, those are safe for later in the series, but you do gain access to these machines called eggs. Depending on which one you have in the loadout equipped, these can be very useful in tanking damage and keeping a character safe, like if say the boss has a move that can really hurt the party. Combat is relatively the same, except you can't use items or ether, you can't heal, and if you die in the robot, you cannot be revived. Any special function like those will require certain accessories. In order to use the 6 AP attack called W-hit, you need to have 2 of the same weapon equipped. Also, you cannot take advantage of one of the most important functions, boosting. This allows you to steal a turn, like if you feel an enemy is close to death, but at the same time so are you, so if you have enough in that boost meter, a maximum of 3, you can spend one to interrupt the turn and gain the advantage. That said, so can the enemy, and they will not be afraid of doing so either. In fact, they seem to do it so much it annoys the hell out of me in some cases. Sometimes they'll even do it in retaliation to something, like ether attacks. Now there is one thing to pay attention when trying to boost, the event wheel. There are 4 panels. Nothing at all, the red one that boosts chances of critical hits, the green one that boosts how much you gain if you attack, and the blue one that gives you more points for certain skills should you kill a foe. I should also note that while on the field, there are special destructible containers that can make enemies affected with status effects, like with being slowed down, as well as cause certain event panels to be active. There's never a downside to these, so just sneak up to an enemy and time your blasts. The turns also have a bit of tension to them at the bottom right. It will only list a set of characters, so you never really know who's going to go next sometimes, which might make you even more tempted to boost just to take advantage of the event wheel, especially with faster enemies. Or enemies that hit like a truck and you really do not want them to hit on that crit wheel. Now regarding those skills, after fights you gain points for extracting passes from accessories, learning new ether spells, and boosting certain attributes of your characters. The one regarding accessories has a level to it, so you may have to extract some skills your character may not even need to level up just to get the better skills. The rate you gain these points is also low, making this process even more annoying. It's a neat idea that saved my ass a few times though. Just could have been implemented a tad better. Ether spells are learned by spending enough points depending on the ones you already unlocked, all of which can branch out from a tree. Unfortunately, you cannot skip ahead and see what else you can get, but you can at least see the color of the skill and press R2 to learn what kind of spell it is, provided it gives a useful description anyway. What's better is that for half the point cost, you can transfer certain spells to other characters. For example, I could get Momo to learn Shion's powerful all-healing spells. However, the ether spells do have limited usage, mainly with attack ethers. You're better off just using tech attacks as they suck, and will continue to suck until game 3, unless you're using Xion and using the parts from giant robots, but more on that later. Attributes can be boosted with attack points, like increasing your stats, or by improving on techniques you already mastered. So when it comes to the blue event slot, it can be extremely tempting to wait for an enemy that is close to death and kill them on that turn. Maybe even use the boost method to make sure a character on that panel can kill them. There's an enjoyable bit of risk and reward to it, helping to reduce the grind without feeling like you could die in a single turn, provided the enemy isn't over leveled anyway, and the chances of that happening are fairly slim. You can't boost if your turn is next though, so it does require some timing. And there were a few points where the game just refused to let me boost for some odd reason. By the end of the game, I paid less attention to the eggs since the damage output wasn't quite worth it anymore. At the same time, you have to pay attention to the elemental properties to these attacks, as it is very possible to accidentally heal an enemy. In fact, one of the things that bothers me is not being able to see what kind of element your standard attacks have, requiring you to memorize them for the best combinations. But it's also important to boost your stats too. You'd be surprised by just how a single point in the defense stats can save your ass. Actually, after getting the shortcuts, I recommend boosting the stats ASAP. By the time your characters are buffed with the right skills, the eggs will still just kinda be an optional thing. Sadly, it requires a huge time sink to be useful, especially when the game doesn't give you a lot of money to play around with. It's fun for robot enthusiasts, but beating the game with just the main characters is much easier on your wallet. Unless you're good at gambling anyway. Although there is another way to break the game in half. Remember those giant robot parts I mentioned? Well, there are red doors scattered in each level that can be decoded with the right, decoder. Once open, you can gain access to unique items, like useful accessories. Double Buster basically allows you to use 2 shortcut tech attacks in a row with 6 AP, and it's glorious. One thing you definitely want though are the giant robot parts. These aren't used for the eggs. Rather, because someone like Tokusatsu shows or just wanted to make a reference to Xenogears maybe, you can take these parts to a scientist in a certain area. Depending on what you have, Xion will gain access to one-time use attack spells that can be very handy, like if you're grinding and want the best rewards. Get them all and congrats! You beat the game! No, really, Erde Kaiser will be a recurring thing in this series, and it's basically the I win spell. I mean sure, for the final bosses it didn't exactly one-shot them, but by that point, it didn't really need to. Formations aren't really handled well. In stuff like, say, Lost Odyssey, going to the back row usually lowers your physical attack output, but ups your defense, and vice versa for your front row fighters. Some characters could bypass the penalty, like having long-range weaponry or just using magic. This game, however, makes sure that those in the back are not really able to attack, which can be extra annoying if an enemy pushes your character to the back, because you're going to have to waste a turn to move them back up to the front. The only upside is those in the back can't be targeted by certain moves. It's certainly more beneficial for enemies given how much health they possess, whereas if I do it, the person in the back might as well be an eternal healer since ether attacks are worthless. And yes, long-range moves are disabled too. The levels at times sometimes feel a bit complicated, but honestly they're really simple, just a little bit cramped. You aren't completely in the dark though. The radar on the bottom right keeps track of anyone near you, provided they aren't hiding for an ambush anyway. green are friendlies, while anything yellow and red are enemies. Due to the design of the levels, it's hard to just run past them, but that's what walking is for. With careful timing, you can bypass encounters in some places, which was essential during Ziggy's level when he's all alone, and I really didn't buy any more items. Also, while this thankfully didn't happen too often, I felt one or two areas could sometimes be a bit too dark. And some puzzles are simple, while others can be a tad more complicated, especially in the Tower of Nephilim, as it requires listening carefully to a certain set of notes in order to destroy the pillars, and honestly, I'm surprised I got it right on my first try. My biggest gripe, however, is the soundtrack, or rather, the lack of it being used when walking around. Unless something big is happening in the story, there will be no music whatsoever. I understand some feel like it adds a layer of realism, but it ends up being distracting to me. In a horror game, or at least one with lots of tension, I can understand leaving it out in some spots to fool the player, or put them on edge as they don't know what will happen. When it comes to this game, I'm left pulling out my phone and listening to some videos on YouTube until something exciting happens, which I only do for grinding sessions. For example, until the Gnosis attack, I was left kinda bored since walking around didn't offer me much in the way of tunes, and I had to force myself to pay attention to the story. When the Gnosis attack happened, suddenly the music shifted and everything became much more engaging. It's not until towards the end of the game that music is suddenly put into the dungeons without the story going nuts. Sadly, that also leads me to my other music problem, the battle theme. Do you enjoy listening to cool boss themes from other games? Too bad, this game has only one track for every single encounter. As you can imagine, this also distracted me unless a boss fight was particularly difficult. The one exemption is the final boss. The theme itself is perfectly fine, but without anything else to look forward to, I was left bored. One of the things I love in other games is looking forward to special fights. Even Digital Xenosaga had multiple battle themes to cover all the various encounters, both in and out of the story. So to have that just gone and save for the finale feels crap. And you might know my pain considering the only song used in this section is the battle theme. I sure hope you like it. Most surprising of all though are the extra things you can do in this game. Apart from extra bosses, there's an email system that allows you to make decisions to get items or better gear sometimes, though it requires some positioning here and there. There are probably like a ton of emails I missed. They also include shameless plugins for Namco's other series such as Tekken 4. What's funny to me is stuff relating to Namco x Capcom. See, Kazuya Mishima of all people sends the email to Xion, and they technically met before in that game, but as enemies, and Xion is from the far future. So now I'm just wondering if the two got it on and Kazuya is desperately trying to keep a relationship by proving how strong he is. I now suddenly want to see him holding up a boombox by her window. There are also a ton of minigames as well. You have the standard casino with slots and poker to get some neat items. And there's a complicated card game that, while I haven't had too much time to play it since I really need to finish this review, has some good things going for it, with cards very cheap to purchase in the game. It's a nice way to kill some time, even if there are no really useful rewards. There's also the mech missions, which I couldn't find in my playthrough. I actually forgot where it was. And there's also a drill game that requires precision and good timing in order to get all the good rewards. Combine all of this with the extra bosses, bonus gear you can collect from the decoder doors, and you have a game with a surprising amount of content, even if it doesn't really have that many good side quests. And you gotta go through the story to get all the goodies, so let's see how that holds up.
Morning, Kos-mos. How do you feel?
Good morning, Xian. All systems are normal.
Well, how about introducing yourself?
Our story starts off slow. Like, really slow. Slow enough that I'm just gonna skip to the main points. Basically, a mysterious object known as the Zohar is discovered, and must be handled with great care, for if some people touch it, they vanish, presumably dead. A team of scientists and soldiers are sent to retrieve the object and return it, but also have issues of their own as the crew was assembled hastily. This is evident when the main character, Xion, is trying to gather test data on kos-mos, even ignoring some of the dangers to get the results. She unfortunately fails, much to the chagrin of her superiors, although why the rush if it's enough that would probably kill her? These things, the Gnosis. Basically ghost aliens of great power. Doesn't matter how many guns you have, they cannot go down, for their bodies seem to exist in another world, or something like that. I heard there is a way to technically kill them by using the right timing of their attacks, but nobody here is capable of such a feat. Kos-mos is one of the only individuals to counter the threat by using the Hilbert effect, pulling the Gnosis into the real world and allowing them to get their asses whooped. By the time she does this though, there are already many casualties, and I gotta admit, the Gnosis make a damn good scary impression. We have seen aliens that seem invincible depending on the weaponry available, like the Xenomorph in Alien Isolation, or ones that require great care to deal with, like John Carpenter's The Thing. yet one you cannot even hurt without some special robot around, ones that phase through fricking walls whenever they please and can even possess technology and use it against you, it's legitimately unsettling. And extra awesome when Kos-mos is able to turn the tide, which... just let me play this. However, Kos-mos is not exactly... well, let me put it this way. There are Realians, machines with human emotions and even have rights, able to care and willingly put themselves on the line for others. Then you have Kos-mos, a pure android who follows logic to a dangerous degree. This is shown when she kills Virgil, a soldier who was fighting the Gnosis as he was in the way. A shame she couldn't just dash around and hit the Gnosis. It's not like she demonstrated that ability or anything. Though really, it's also because there weren't enough seats for everyone, so someone had to be left out. And I'm sure we will never hear from Virgil again. Ever. For realsies. We get perspectives from other characters as well, like with Alan, who never really becomes a proper main party member, but is mainly the straight man to all the chaos happening. Despite being comic relief, he is still important to the plot as Shion's assistant. There's also Ziggurat 8, or Ziggy, a cyborg who seeks to eliminate his emotions, but relents a bit after saving and bonding with a Realian named Momo. Through his perspective, we see the u-tic organization, the main bad guys of the series along with Margulis, a formidable swordsman who easily proves his might given his tough boss battle. Also, whenever he talks about the emulator, I always keep thinking his organization is going to war with Nintendo over ROMs and emulation. There's also Wilhelm and his testaments, but they don't do much right now, mostly just building up future plot stuff as a certain character is recruited. And later on, we also get Albedo, a creepy villain with connections to another protagonist named Junior, and he kinda takes over the antagonist role for the rest of the game. He's also crazy as hell, and sometimes I swear I could put his lines beside the Ultimate Warriors, and you may not even see the difference.
A completely pure consciousness, an eternal spiral, undefiled by impurities. A fusion of fire, breath, and spirit. What can we call you but angels? You know what he said while he coughed up his lifeblood? Except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. Wheat. There's enough of it. We can afford to waste as much as we want.
Don't take that to mean I hate him. On the contrary, he makes himself known as a damn near unstoppable force of insanity, and knowing just how to egg on the protagonist. The other factions feel mostly just built up, and it kinda makes sense given how they wanted to make this series into 6 games. I mean, technically speaking, there are more than 3, with Pied Piper on mobile phones, and A Missing Year, a video series explaining what happened between games 2 and 3. There's also the DS version that comes with 1 and 2 combined, but we never got that stateside. At least the former 2 have been translated by fans by now. As such, when it comes to the spoiler section, don't expect too much as I still need to play the other games and refresh my memory. Basically, the story involves a lot of factions using each other for their own benefit, especially Albedo. Some of these factions like u-tic have ties in the Federation, making things harder for our heroes, and there is a lot of political stuff to consider as well. But at the end of the day, the main goal is to stop a being called Udo from destroying everything, and from what I looked up, it's apparently God. You know, I tried to cover this series to deviate away from Shin Megami Tensei. I did not expect to have it thrown back into my face. Regardless of my feelings at the story's pacing, the characters are still a treat to watch. Despite me saying how I hate Xion in Game 3, I'm proud to say I still love her in the first game. On top of being competent and not willing to let people push her around too much, even her own bosses and creations, she can be just as entertaining to watch. My favorite moment is when she is nearly shot up by Virgil's forces during the Gnosis attack, flips out on him, and even pushes the giant gun out of her face like he meant nothing. The terminology problem is nowhere near as problematic as the beginning of Final Fantasy XIII though. Unlike that game, I'm not left questioning the situation or some of the terms associated with it. The issue Xenosaga has is with some of the character backstories. For example, Cherenkov has some issues defined by certain terms that are not explained until he is pulled out of the story. The game will eventually explain things, but it can get a tad annoying sometimes. I sometimes have to watch a scene a few different times to understand what is happening. Overall, Xenosaga's plot is good, but does have some issues, yet at the same time nothing that makes me pull my hair out. Don't expect the comedy to persist though. This is still a rather dark story and there are scenes to reflect that, and the story can feel a little dense as a result with all the long cutscenes. I think my expectations play into that, especially after .hack GU. I'm used to there being some kind of arc I can talk about with a character, how it helps the game stand out on its own despite being part 1 of the series. Both Xenosaga and Digital Devil Saga though kind of feel like the truly important stuff is saved for the next game. Not necessarily the worst thing, as I'm still able to enjoy the games on their own, especially when some of these added story details are good, but I can understand why some may drop the title just after the first game. After all, if the build-up feels tiring or just drags on for too long, your interest is likely to wane, especially if you're left asking way too many questions. And that's Xenosaga's biggest issue, so many questions, and while they do give the answer eventually, as well as the necessary details, they take a while to get there, meaning you may find yourself either confused or annoyed and have to look at the database of terms. While I have expressed my annoyance at the idea of data logs, that's because rather than be optional, they become mandatory to follow the plot easier so your eyes don't glaze over for the 20-minute cutscene. That being said, I'm still interested in Xenosaga and where it goes from here, unlike in Final Fantasy XIII. The plot likely would have benefited more by being structured like the DS version, where it just combines the first 2 games. Overall though, Xenosaga's plot is good. Slow as hell, sometimes throwing in terminology that requires looking at a data log, but it's not nearly as painful as Final Fantasy XIII. The cast is likable and understandable, even funny in some cases, while also delivering solid stories regarding their emotions. And while I did mention there were a ton of cutscenes, I hesitate to say any of them feel useless. It's just following everything might be a challenge if you aren't used to this type of story. That, and when you look at the original idea of the game, well, things are bound to end up suffering. What else can we dissect? For that, we have to dive into some spoilers.
Hold it!
Where do you think you're going? Hey, why don't you do me a favor and let him go for now? I'll do my best to keep you entertained in the meantime.
Since this game is just setting things up, there's not a whole lot I can analyze in terms of spoilers, and it basically just be me recounting the plot. But there was one common thing I noticed. Rejection of the past. You might have heard the old saying how the past can't hurt you or something. Well, it seems a good majority of the protagonists are afraid of embracing the past and the truth that comes with it. I'll start with Xion, for example. There are 2 past events she tries to repress, or at least not constantly let them rule her life. The first is when kos-mos was first activated thanks to an invasion by u-tic. There, she was able to kill the attackers, and almost everyone else. Also, her movements kinda remind me of Sadako from The Ring. Yeah, I think the appeal of the robo-waifu kinda decreased a tad. This incident, while she has kinda recovered and is used it to try and improve kos-mos, well, she's also afraid of what kos-mos has become as a result of everything, becoming a cold engine of logic that wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone in her path if they just stand there, as well as defy her orders. This isn't help with kos-mos' actions, and she even has to risk her own life to make sure she stops. Plus, she also lost her boyfriend that day, so yeah, not exactly a good day for Xion. Actually, the past with Kevin has also harmed Alan as well. He clearly has feelings for Xion and cares about her safety, but despite his attempts and often failing, fears of the past also halts him from doing better, all because he doesn't want to come across as if he was replacing Kevin. The other one will be touched on again in the future, the events at Milsha, when the Gnosis were summoned into the world. As a child, she tried to visit her sick mom, and I think you can see where this is going. There's a lot of repressed memories here, hiding something that she clearly doesn't want to remember. Some things about this trauma even affect her to this day, such as thunder, even one's part of a simulation. But I guess that doesn't go for lightning, considering some of her special attacks have that element. Then we have Junior, who has similar fears about the past, shown to get angry when Momo slightly pressed him for answers. He's revealed to be a URTV, kind of child soldiers who have been experimented on with the sole purpose to combat the being called Udu. I say kind of considering Junior hasn't aged all these years, so there are some side effects to the experiments. We don't get to see a whole lot of what happened on his end, that's mainly saved for the second game, but it's clear that during the summoning of the Gnosis, the URTVs went berserk and started to kill people. Not help when Albedo reveals that the incident Junior was so afraid of was his own fault, breaking the link and allowing Udu to turn everyone crazy. The encounters with Albedo provide more evidence of a pain past, as he is always able to get under Junior's skin, torturing him with not just words, but what he later does to Momo. Also, apparently there was a deleted scene that made it seem like he was mind raping her. I'm going to whine about the censorship in Game 3 when it comes to blood, but I'm actually glad they cut that. Seriously, can we stop having lolicons? There isn't too much to Chaos at the moment. He rarely talks about himself and avoids such questions, like when Xion asked him just what he was when he could Hakai the Gnosis so easily. Momo is so fixated on how she viewed her father that she feels hurt when they claim her creator was an insane madman and responsible for bringing the Gnosis. Even seeing him in the past ended up hurting her, as well as any other truths related to it, like her other sisters dying and being used for her own sake. And finally, Ziggy shows a desire to become more robotic and lose his memories, viewing the past as painful to him. In this story, and no, I have not seen Pied Piper yet, it was described that his death was a suicide, and he was forced to become a cyborg due to the Life Recycling Act. Given how long he has lived, unable to do a thing about the past, not even to be able to see his kid grow up, he rejects the past in an attempt to become fully machine, to finally let himself die for good. Suicide didn't exactly work out so well, and I wouldn't doubt there were safety measures to ensure he couldn't do it again. The only time he shifts his views on this is by trying to protect Momo, kind of viewing her as a substitute child given his flashback. And while he does remain calm despite Junior's anger, seemingly uncaring, I can see it as him trying to keep a calm mind in order to save Momo, recognizing that such a reckless attitude like Junior has could make things worse for her. At least how I saw it, since he never really coldly dismisses her. Shooting down an idea, maybe, but never fully seen as a cold engine of logic like kos-mos. Hell, he actually helps Xion and kos-mos later on, so he's not fully more machine now than man. There is more to his past, but I'm not even sure if I should cover Pied Piper, mainly because there's no footage in English. Well, at least we can rest assured that no canonical information is stored away in some phone games. God effing damn it, Square. Actually, there is one more character that kinda relates to this subject. Andrew Cherenkov. I barely remember him, but that's because when I played, well, I was an impatient bastard who skipped cutscenes just so I could play the damn game. And it's a shame because his story is actually kinda interesting. He was posing as a soldier for the Federation, secretly working for u-tic to secure the Zohar. However, the Gnosis proved too formidable, stole it, and now he had to tail Xion's group, spying on them while trying to follow Margulis's orders. Seems standard for a character, right? Well, Cherenkov has a few more details to make his story a bit more unique and fits well with the setting. He suffers from PTSD during the war, made into a super soldier, kind of like the URTVs, at least from what I gleaned from some dialogue in the Wikia. The war made him unstable, enough so they had to go through personality reconditioning, and the help he got, well, let's just say it was less than helpful. And once again, I'm reminded of the real world with how certain assholes are treating veterans, and unfortunately I don't have more clips of Trunk being hurt, but fortunately I have plenty of Vince McMahon getting hurt. The bad care and his wife cheating on him, well, things didn't exactly work out so well, and led to whatever treatment he got failing, and he choked her to death. He tried again to live a normal life, only to meet a clone of his ex that triggered bad memories, and he killed her as well. You know, maybe you guys should just put him into some kind of facility meant to help these kind of people. Well, they eventually tried something like that, putting him into a place to be used as a test subject, and he murdered everyone in there. What's funny is that by the time Margulis takes him in, he is able to get a high position within the military and display some basic logic. What does it say about the government when they are so inept that one of the main villains of the series is able to do a much better job in helping him? But you get what I mean, right? Cherenkov is one of the only characters let his past rule him, to define him and his future. And in the end, well, after a tough fight after he turned into a Gnosis, he ended up dying, viewing it as the end he truly wanted. Considering all he went through, it's no surprise he had some kind of suicidal wish. Although at the same time there is some counter evidence, like when kos-mos went berserk during the u-tic invasion of Vector, he ran away from the destruction the proto-waifu was causing. And of course there was this general fear of kos-mos, yelling at Xion when there weren't enough tests to be done to ensure their own safety from the Gnosis, but the fear of the past is something that continued to haunt him until his death, like when he witnessed visions of his supposed family and wishing they went away. Unfortunately, unlike the gang of heroes, he wasn't able to get any real help. Then again, maybe by taking those kind of missions, he did subconsciously feel like he wanted to die. Since he's never brought back, I'm afraid I don't really have an answer for this. I think it's best to end everything here though, as further analysis is going to require the other games. So thank you for tuning in, and I shall see you next time on the review of Xenosaga 2. Oh god, I have to play Xenosaga 2. Oh god, I have to beat Xenosaga 2. Oh god, I have to do all that and I'm not making a dime. Why do I do this to myself?